Welcome to another episode of As Chess Recommends Film Discussion. In this episode, we are going to talk about Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Uzak. So Ceylan is a Turkish director. Many would probably consider him to be the greatest Turkish director, and I personally consider him to be like one of the best directors working today. And Uzak was his fourth film or third feature film, but he also did one short film before this. It came out in 2002, so it's a very early film for him. He started in like the mid 90s, and his latest film came out last year, although it's showing in some countries just this year. So that will be interesting to watch when we can do that. I mean, Altaz already has a ticket to watch the latest one very soon, and I will see when I can watch it too. But this film is about two men, they are relatives. So we have this guy moving to Istanbul, he's unemployed, and he tries to find work at Istanbul, but he stays with his relative, and they have a bit of this kind of conflict there, as they are very different types of people. Again, the guy who moves to Istanbul is this kind of, you could say, a Philistine in a way, that he's very uneducated and working class, but then his relative is more of this kind of highly educated art type of person. So there's a bit of that conflict there. And again, the name of the film, Uzak, I think the English name of the film is Distant. So that already kind of tells you a lot about the themes of the film. And I was actually looking at the Wikipedia article for this film, and the British director Andrew Hay, who directed some of my favorite films, Weekend and All of Us Strangers, actually said that he thinks Uzak is the greatest film of the 21st century so far. And again, I would say it's one of the greatest as well, although I wouldn't say it's the greatest, but definitely one of the better films of the 21st century. And again, Ceylan has made quite a few films, and his style has, I mean, in many ways stayed the same. Again, this is the earliest film from him that I have seen, so I don't know what his films look like before this. But then later on in his career, he started making these 3-hour films. So this is like less than 2 hours. But if you take out the running times, this is like stylistically still very similar than his later stuff. And he has one of his trademarks in this film is that how he shoots snowy, like landscapes and cities, and we see lots of snow. So that's one of his trademarks. And he was very much influenced by Andrei Tarkovsky. He's his main film influence, and we even see characters watching a Tarkovsky film here. And then he was also influenced by Anton Chekhov and other Russian authors. And I also think he mentioned in his Criterion Closet video recently that Eric Rohmer is one of his favorite director and one of the great to him, because he likes the films where nothing happens but everything happens at the same time, which is like very similar to me. And yeah, I can see the Rohmer influences in Ceylan films. Again, it's mostly about characters sitting around, walking around and talking, so it's very similar to Rohmer in that way. But that's a bit of context. So now I'm going to ask Altaz some quick general thoughts about the film.
Yeah, before I share my initial thought, I want to say I think it was last podcast I had the burning question, and then I asked you, "Oh, what film would you recommend if you're purposely trying to make me feel uncomfortable?" And then at first you said, "Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about it." And then you said, "Well, maybe the one that's coming up in the next round, Uzak." And when I was watching this film, I was like, wow, like SGS understands. I mean, we have only met through YouTube and these chats, but I was like, oh wow, it's amazing how much an understanding you can get of a person, because yes, this film made me extremely uncomfortable. It was really unsettling, and even afterwards with my wife, I was like, my God, I'm so like weighed down by this film. Uh, so we'll obviously discuss that, but I wanted to mention that wow, you were like spot on, that this film made me very uncomfortable. But great film. Yeah, fantastic film. Loved the film. Uh, uh, just my second Ceylon film. I've only seen his very first one, which I did a video on, and but I'm glad I did that because when you mentioned the snow, I could connect because his first film opens with a shot of snow. So um, yeah, this is going to be interesting to discuss. I'm very excited to hear your thoughts because of what was going on in the film. I'm sure like you're going to have so many interesting reflections and things to say.
So again, before we get into the spoiler part of the discussion, we can now talk a little bit about like again what type of people would like this film, and also very generally what type of film it is. So of course, Ceylan is a slow cinema director, but at the same time, I don't think his films are kind of as inaccessible as Belatar, for example, or Tarkovsky, because even this film has even some humor in it, and it's like has a fairly straightforward plot and everything, so that you can easily follow it. But if you have like if your attention span is used to like TikTok and the modern day craziness, it might be hard to concentrate on a film like this. So I think you should watch films like this when you are like fairly relaxed and are not like worried about anything, and you can pay attention to the film even though not that much happens in it. But it's definitely not one of his slowest films, or in the grand scheme of slow cinema, it's not like the slowest that you can find, because this again it constantly moves and the scenes aren't like insanely long or anything, and again it cuts from the apartment where much of it is to like a really nicely shot outside scenes, and so the scenery keeps changing a lot, and again there aren't these like 20-minute long scenes or anything like that. So in that way it's very accessible for slow cinema, and I think many of the themes will be easy to grasp, at least the kind of surface level big themes of the film, but obviously there's always these bigger details if you really want to look at the film.
Yeah, I'd agree with your assessment. It's definitely accessible, and there are so many elements that are easy to kind of connect with in terms of like entering into the world and the context. Because, of course, the very base premises is this uninvited guest, the awkwardness of having a guest in the house. They have different ways, you have different ways, and so there are going to be transgressions and violations and conflict. So I think that part um, is very accessible to most people, but where it might be challenging is as it moves into more introspective spaces. uh, I think, yeah, it can be um, some of those introspections, depending where you're coming from, could feel heavy. But if they feel heavy, you're most likely looking for that kind of introspection. So I think that will suit. But yes, it is slower, and I agree with you with this kind of shorts, short form, move things quickly, quicker cuts, all these kinds of things. This will be more challenging, but I also feel like it can have a great detoxification effect, um, because I myself used a slow cinema for that. To be honest, like I think I've shared the story before that I felt like that, like I was all constantly distracted, and then I started to watch longer movies. Like that's when I first watched like Andrei Rublev and stuff, and it forced me out of the what's next kind of always distracted guy. Want very exciting movies, or you want to move from thing to thing. And interestingly enough, some of the scatteredness of the human mind is also explored through one of the characters in the film, so that'll be fun to talk about.
And I think this film is also very relevant, and it's not just particular to Turkish context, but it actually many of the themes are very relevant to even if you are from the US, for example, or from any European country, because it tackles this kind of alienation, isolation, family problems, and also how hard it is to find work and everything, and how you kind of your personhood is also defined by your profession and things like that. So it's like very relevant to people from Western countries as well. So I think you can really relate to it because it doesn't necessarily feel like a very Turkish film, but it feels like a very universal film that we can all relate to.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Very relatable films. Really relatable film about very commonly shared uh, human struggles and challenges. And like you said, in his own Criterion Closet visit, I believe he mentioned, he discovered when discovering cinema and like cinema of Bergman and stuff like that, how you can put all your kind of human flaws and challenges and conflicts and all this stuff and all into cinema and to kind of explore and share and all that. So he's very much the film's very much aligned to that, and it's a very human film. It definitely crosses boundaries, which is amazing because a lot of people would think of Turkey in a certain way and not think about kind of a world like Istanbul or like the more kind of cosmopolitan side or them having the same problems as you. And this is something you mentioned in your kind of snobbery videos too, that the power of cinema to unite people because you can see, oh, they're just like me. Their concerns, the concerns, and it brings humanity together to a common ground. So yes, I agree with you.
Ceylan's films have actually really made me want to visit Turkey because he shoots these like um, landscapes and stuff so beautifully that
Yeah.
it would be great to see that. And obviously their own brand of architecture and everything looks very interesting, and I'm very interested in things like that. So we'll definitely have to visit someday. I know my parents visited Turkey in the 90s, but I need to go there myself someday.
Yeah, and maybe we'll be there together because, like I said, when I was in my wife's hometown in Bulgaria, it's actually not that far from Turkey. So even one of the trains we took from Plovdiv to her hometown, that train runs on and goes straight to Istanbul, so they're neighboring countries, and so that would be a lot of fun. So I'm definitely fascinated by Turkey as well because a lot of uh, I kind of got more into the region not from the films but from the books. So Elif Shafak and Pamuk and like some really interesting literature as well that comes out of Turkey. Lots of great art. I'm also very much interested in things like Sufism and stuff like that. So yeah, it's always great. It's got a mystical feel, but then it's got a modern feel. So I do enjoy that.
Yeah, but now we could move on to the spoiler filled discussion. And this like has some plot points that maybe it's better not to watch this part. That
I'm going to spoil the movie. The
yeah,
mouse dies. The mouse dies.
yeah, it's not the most plot heavy movie, but it's more than the previous one that we talked about, Nostalgia, I think. So yeah,
The mouse dies. There you go. Now you don't need to watch the movie anymore. No, I'm just joking. Clearly, that's not a spoiler, but that's just.
and the film is more about like the questions it asks rather than the answers, kind of like Nostalgia as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we we want to talk about aesthetic. So again, like you said, just beautiful cinematography. I mean that it's just outstandingly beautiful, even though it's kind of like this urban story in an urban environment and all that kind of stuff. But the way it's shot, it's so pleasing uh, to the eye. Um,
Yeah, there are okay, lots of wide shots, and there are like these shots of streets, and then we have the water backgrounds that are really beautiful, and Okay, much of it is inside the apartment, but even that part is like shot really nicely. For example, when they're watching the Tarkovsky movie, which is kind of one of the funny scenes in the movie, and then again the guest guy who is the guest in his home like goes to sleep, but then he comes back, and how it's shot that he goes through the door, but we see the door when he also comes back, and everything, and how he switches the channels and everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's like a funny moment and also cleverly done.
yeah, this outside inside, and definitely, and like both are shot so well, because obviously there is this this is one of those stories: outside inside, outside inside, two worlds, uh, and but both like translate very well, and it connects very well, and yeah, the camera work is fantastic. But I also really like the palette, um, because while it is dealing with like challenging things and feelings, it is like Romer shot brightly. It's quite a bright film. It's not using darker tones and stuff like that. So it is quite colorful. It has the nice colors of the Istanbul neighborhoods, which in me always uh, I can connect with, because when I was working and living in Kabul in Afghanistan, that there's similar architecture and streets and like that. When the snow falls, it was like that. So for me, it always evokes that feeling where I can connect what those streets feel like to walk down and stuff like that. So yeah, well, really really great in aesthetic. Um,
Yeah, and I think the color of the film is also kind of how you imagine Turkey and everything. So those types of colors, lots of brown and everything. So it's like a very interesting kind of cultural exploration as well, and that's what I again find fascinating about watching films from all over the world. That you can see the architecture and also not just like famous places of a city, but also the kind of random neighborhoods and places like that. So it's always very interesting to follow. And I think one of the best shots in the film is what I'm also gonna use as the thumbnail when again in the end the more educated guy is sitting in the bench, and we
yeah.
for first I think see his back, the shot coming. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, and then we also have a close up to his face when he looks like pretty
Oh yeah,
alien, not necessarily sad, but very alienated and isolated. And of course, okay, we talked about the inside outside thing, but we kind of see how there's this isolation and distant feeling in both inside and outside. How again the guy goes look out for work but never can find anything, and he also follows that woman, but then he sees that she has another man, and so even that all of those glimmers of hope turn to darkness in the end. And obviously there's this distance between the two men because they are so different. And there's this moment that kind of made me think about the you as an American dream, even though it's a Turkish film. But when the educated guy says that, yeah, I came to Istanbul with nothing and I
yeah,
worked my way through it. I made my life myself, and but you don't have any skills, so why don't you do the same? I got no help. So it just made me think of the you as that you should work hard and you can find your way. Yeah. Things like that. So that moment I think was very like relevant to other countries as well and not just Turkey.
yeah. And one thing I was just going to mention in terms of the region and aesthetic as well is like it's a real treat if you haven't really been in the region and stuff like that. Like most of us have not. It does blow your mind because you see this contrast of snow, but these kind of turquoisey skies that are very Mediterranean, right? That whole region. So to kind of see the combination of the two together is something you don't often see, and that really gives it a sense of otherworldliness. The space that excites you, like you said, you immediately feel like, oh, I'd love to kind of go and see these places. But then I believe, yes, it's in this film. he says, but you've been all these places, right? When he's going and seeking, he's like, oh, I'm going to go work on a ship, and that'll mean I'll get to travel and see all these different places and stuff like that. And he's saying to his cousin, so the intellectual cousin is Mahmut, who lives in Istanbul, and it's Yusuf, who basically comes after losing his job at a factory in his hometown. Presumably, probably was Mahmut's hometown as well. And he basically comes to Istanbul to seek out a new job, and he's thinking of working on the ships. And in that, he's saying to Mahmut, uh, "Yeah, you got to do that. You got to see all these places." And then, uh, true to the point you're making about, this connects to human experience around the world, he goes, well, once you're like seen in places, you realize all places are the same place. uh I believe that that is the exchange. I hope I'm not mixing it up with something else, but I'm pretty sure that was the exchange, because that really resonated with me, because that's something I've also felt in life, is that sometimes we are seeking the other, we're seeking this excitement, we're seeking this elsewhere, which is a theme even in Kasaba, which I discussed in that my video, um, where you're seeking to kind of get out of a predicament, and you think going elsewhere, so going to Istanbul and then maybe going out to the world, that somewhere this problem is solved, and by going there your problem will be solved. And what you end up finding is that wherever you go, there you are, and human problems continue, um, and no society has figured it out. So it's like this, him coming and figuring it out in Istanbul, ironically, is also not, Mahmut is not, we don't see Mahmut in this happy, super successful life. We actually see him as a divorcee. We see him as, um, kind of his dream falling apart. He wanted to make films like Tarkovsky, and he cannot make films like Tarkovsky. And yeah, he has this nice apartment, but he's kind of miserly, and has all these rules, and he's not that terribly happy, and he's kind of like self-absorbed, and all that. So those are all like really interesting things going on in the film.
Yeah, and again, the closest place to Turkey that I've been to is Egypt, and there are definitely some similarities in terms of how the buildings look and the cafes and restaurants and everything, and obviously at the same time very similar. But I also started thinking, because I had in London like several Turkish teachers actually. They were really, really nice, but they often talked about how they had to leave Turkey because they kind of, again, some of them like politics teachers, for example, would go to jail in Turkey and stuff. So how this kind of intellectual life is maybe often looked down upon and kind of controlled again by the state. So maybe that is something that could also add to the isolation of the intellectual character of this movie, that his type of people aren't appreciated as much as they could be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. 100%, because Turkey is one of those countries, like similar to Iran, where there is a battle. I mean, just like, you have great Iranian filmmakers and stuff like, because definitely there's an intelligentsia. There are these great artists, and there is a legacy of actually having that kind of challenging art and philosophy, even within religious institutions themselves. However, then there's the other side, the kind of mass side, or the easily manipulatable side, um, the side that's more orthodox, or is trying to be more dogmatic, and they're definitely, um, at a battle. So you're right to say that yes, that there would be a class that's kind of there, but not always appreciated, or even seen as a corrupting force in a way, because there are certain things that you could see in Mahmut's lifestyle that are corrupting forces in a way, if you looked at from more traditional, or values are tied, or represented in the Islamic world, right? He's watching pornography. For example, he's having an affair with a married woman. He is doesn't have any problem with prostitution. They're drinking, which Turkey is liberal about drinking, I believe, because they have their own beer that's popular and stuff like that. So definitely all that is going on. And what's also interesting about you have more experience with Chan. This is only my second film, but I feel like it's everything's autobiographical because he comes from a very small village town. So in a way, he's half Yusuf, the guy who's literally in the first shot. We see him literally like coming out of the forest. We don't see him come to Istanbul, by flight or train or a taxi. He's like walking out of the woods. So he's clearly out of the backwoods. He's kind of like coming out from outside of civilization into modern civilization, which is kind of what was Chelan's journey himself. Um, and then Chelan is now this artist and filmmaker and intellectual and all that. So he's Mahmud as well. He's very cosmopolitan. He's very modern in a sense. He's part of a different world. And so it's very much through two characters is also a conflict within himself because he can relate and connect with the two Turkeys and understand them so well.
Yeah, there is this discussion about these places in many of his films, like the Wild Pear Tree, which is his second to latest one. There's this character who is a writer, like a young writer, and he writes about his town, and there's lots of discussion about these different towns and kind of isolation and alienation there, and how you cannot find your way in some of these places in Turkey. And of course, you mentioned it earlier that like the character says that yeah, you've been to many places, but like they are all the same. But it's not necessarily that the places are the same, but you always stay the same no matter where you are. So it's in the end your experience is more about the inner side and not the exterior where you are. So, but I think again I can also relate to that quite a lot. That okay, when I moved to London, like okay, lots of things stayed the same, but I think it's not that simple. I think
Yes.
change of scenery can also help a lot, and in a way you can escape certain things of the past when you have a new beginning and different people around you. But again, at the same time, the past always haunts you, like we talked about in our previous film discussion, nostalgia, that it's really hard to escape your previous experiences. And in one of his Ceylan's films, he actually plays the main character himself, and then his wife is also in that movie, and they play a married couple in that movie. And it shows their like very troubling marriage in that film. So I think, like you said, these are very autobiographical films, and I think Ceylan is trying to again explore these themes that he has experienced in his real life, like again this isolation and alienation, and trying to find your path in Turkey and going from place to place and things like this.
Yeah, and so it's like that Yusuf his character is in him. It's like it's never going to be out of him because, like you said, like all of us experience that. We come from a particular world, uh, and it's never not going to be part of your world. But then, yeah, there is the whole question of change because clearly he has also become Mahmud. He also, was changed by coming to the modern city and through art, right? Because there all this art around him, right? Not only just like a Tarkovsky film, so it's like Stalker, and I think at one point he's in bed and he's watching Mirror as well. But also he has these CDs like Beethoven and all that, and even the cousin asks, "Oh, who's this like musician?" And all this stuff. So ignorance to awareness or troglodytism uh, to transcending that. But one thing I wanted to kind of see what your thoughts are, what you point out as how this is achieved. One thing I find really amazing, and I've only seen two films of his, is emotionally his films are very visceral. Like you can feel the conflicts in the like pit of your stomach, like it's like gut wrenching, like it's that's what made me feel uncomfortable. Like I can feel the distress, I can feel the weight of each character, which is an amazing thing to achieve. It's given we're looking at something that's essentially a flat screen, um, and you're experiencing like this, the struggles, the alienation, the pain, the weight, the distress of life, the sometimes, you're trying to achieve something and it's not, you're unable to. So uh, what is there something maybe you see in how he is kind of doing it technically and all that, the films are technically put together, that does this so well?
Yeah, I think he does it with that kind of, I think in the way how, again, the cinematography is very distant, and it's often like, okay, very wide, and then the characters obviously don't overact, that they are very like straight faced, and
Mm.
they don't show these big emotions, but as they don't show these big emotions, it actually ends up being more emotional when it's so distant and so kind of peaceful and quiet, and that kind of peacefulness and quietness and certain type of simplicity actually makes it somehow very grand emotionally, which is like a very interesting contrast, that you achieve something very emotional by not showing very clear emotions, and you achieve
Yeah,
something grand with something very simple.
yeah, it's like something you take away and it becomes, and that's where I felt again, yeah, there's that, again, the impact of it, of Ozu style, because it's the same thing. It's like Ozu, sometimes it's almost like someone's saying something in a respectful, like deadpan way, but you can feel their heart breaking underneath the surface, and it breaks your heart. And it's so distressing. And I felt this all the way through. Like I could feel the pains of each of that people. And maybe because I guess you and I are conflicted in the same ways based on where we come from, the worlds we kind of come from, and then the worlds we now inhabit as a result of going in our journeys through like education and art and discovery and like challenging ourselves and stuff like that. So I guess we feel the same conflicts, I guess, as are going on with some of the, and the loneliness as well, right? That kind of needing to connect, like you mentioned him, Yusuf stalking that uh, girl, but I believe that girl is also played by uh, Chelan's wife now. So I think she does that cameo for that. So that interwovenness of like the personal in there, I feel like, oh, like maybe it's because we feel the same conflicts as what some of the people are going through in those films. Um,
And of course, these films are like very existential, and there you
oh
can see the Dostoevsky influence as well. How we have these kind of troubled people trying to find their way, and usually they often try to find their way through like methods that are not gonna work out. But obviously, these Ceylon films aren't quite as dark as Dostoevsky, because Dostoevsky, even like Crime and Punishment, obviously there's horrible violence in that, but there's not that in this film. But you can see the Dostoevsky influence there, and probably like maybe Sartre and Kierkegaard and people like that as well. And again, he talked about Rome, and of course, Rome films, there is often these characters who are trying to figure out their way throughout a particular problem, whether it's like a love interest or some relationship, and like what is friendship, what is love, and here is obviously like, again, these big questions on like how you move forward, and like family relationships and conflicts, and also the distance between people who are very different and how you solve these issues, but he doesn't again give the answers, but he just asks these questions.
Yeah. And as you were mentioning Dostoevsky, and then I was like, oh yeah, and also when we're talking about his love for Chekhov, and Chekhov has that similar explorations because in a way, right, the futility of life, or as it was in Uncle Vanya, the futility of trying to be good in a corrupt world, or like even the under emoting, because you can see that in Chekhov as well. It's like it's not overly dramatic, the exchanges, but they are very haunting exchanges, and they really resonate with kind of deep down conflicts and struggles that you have, the miscommunications and misunderstandings you have with each other, people having different perceptions on different things, which also the under emoting styles also, I feel like, another mutual favorite of ours, and you and Tony's Hamaguchi's films, which you two have seen way more of his films than I have, but really um, interesting kind of aesthetic and style that I just love. But it also can be haunting too and challenging.
And these types of themes are just very relevant for the current day when we have more and more anxieties and when again finding work is getting harder and harder. These days you cannot just go to a place and ask for work and get it. But these days you have to have like qualifications for everything and experience for everything, and everything is so difficult. There's so much competition and everybody feels anxious and many people feel depressed. So even though this already came out like over 20 years ago, it's just really speaks of the current time. And like I said earlier, it's very universal in the way that it's not just Turkey, but it applies to Finland and the US and the UK and everything.
Yeah, very interesting because what you just said, it also ties to what you were previously saying, right? That whole idea and response of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps because oh, I did that. And so part of the exploration is really him realizing that what he was able to traverse in his journey is becoming more and more impossible for individuals coming from the same background as him to do what he was able to do. And therefore all these there's people just being left behind, uh, literally in the wilderness, in a sense. And you have that theme um, as well, even in Kasaba. It's like this, then that place being a trap. So I think it's so interesting because he's like, with each film he's like taking a different angle of the same phenomenon, and then he's exploring that part of it, then he's exploring another part of it. So in Kasaba it's like exploring like how do you leave a place, and searching for something. And then here it's like person's coming out of the wilderness and they are searching for something, but that place is entirely distant or cold or uninterested in having him there. Like there's no value to him, and so he's kind of left behind in the cold, literally, because it's like snowing and it's cold and it's right. He's just roaming around.
And the roaming around kind of shows also how you cannot escape who you are and you cannot escape the past. Like again, the intellectual says that even though he has been to many places, that it's always the same. But this like border guy cannot even try that out because he just cannot get work and he even cannot escape. So no matter if you can get away from Turkey or even if you stay there, you will always feel the same. And then I was also thinking how these two characters, while okay, one is an intellectual, one is a Vulgarian, I guess, that they are pretty much the same person in the end. Like it's again the funny scene when they're watching Tarkovsky and the Vulgarian goes away, but then even the intellectual, just
Yeah.
starts watching porn. So he doesn't really care about Tarkovsky either. So they are pretty much the same and they have the same problems, even though they think they are very different.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and it's like it. He's he almost has a facade, right? Mahmoud, the intellectual, he has a facade. He's like, yeah, I'm intellectual. I have all these things that like protect me. But through his cousin coming there, he gets becomes slowly becomes more and more aware of his own brokenness, like his own failings. Like, what were his failings like in his marriage? What are his current failings? What even what are his failings in his affair? What are the failings in his career, and all that stuff. So it's like there's an unraveling. So that's a very that part is very accessible in the sense that those are kind of scenarios that are set up in many films. That's what makes this film very accessible. But the exploration is very special, like as in it has such a unique voice in how he's going about that exploration and how he is progressing, and how the arcs are kind of coming about. It's just way more subtle, but really great, but also very funny because we've always had we've all had guests that have come and then basically don't follow what we're trying to say, right? Where he has these rules. We don't smoke in here. We only smoke in the kitchen and all that stuff. And the moment he's not around, his cousin or his relative like violates all that. Um, and he gets all frustrated. But then there's that beautiful scene after the relative has left and he goes in that room and he's just looking at that empty space. And you could tell that now he's feeling really lonely. That as annoying as that person was at times to him, and how different he felt he was from him, he missed the presence. He missed the company. He missed that warmth that he had in the home. He doesn't have anything. There's no one else living in this home but him, and stuff like that basically makes me feel very uncomfortable. Those ideas that the futility of life sometimes and how it can be, because people do, yes, you can end up alone. You can end up like, and then that's all it's ever going to be. He's not sure if his life is going to be anything more, even though he has this great life. It's not that great in some ways.
And I think both of the characters are portrayed so well that we can relate to both of them and wish the best for both of them. And I think again that it's powerful scene when the intellectual. I mean, I keep coming back to this when he says that, yeah, I worked for this alone and stuff, but of course, then you think that he's kind of being not a very nice person and stuff, but you can understand the frustration that he feels that his home has been invaded and that he obviously wants,
When are you going to get a job?
and maybe he even sees himself in the border cousin in the way that, yeah, he has made some kind of a life for himself, but he's still like very disappointed what has happened to him. So there's a bit of that mirroring
Yeah, and there
there as
must be a fear too, right? That he must. I mean, that's what I felt. That there must be some kind of fear too. That if I was him today, I wouldn't make it either. So he's getting defensive about it. Oh, I was able to do it. You can do it. It's almost like this false narrative he's telling you, because he can't deal with the fact that he would feel probably the same way as his cousin, and he wouldn't be able to do what he was able to do previously because of what the state of the world is.
these characters are just able to express so much emotion again, even though they don't make these like big facial expressions like Jack Nicholson or something, but they just are very normal, like very, again, unemotional in a way, but you can just kind of read their eyes and stuff. Like, again, when he's smoking the cigarette in the bench in the end and looking at the water and stuff, you can see so much in his face, like what he's thinking and thinking about his failures and his life and his loneliness and how to move forward and things like that. So there's so much power in this film in that subtle way.
Yeah, even with the part where he has to go visit his mother and stuff. Yeah, yeah. It tells you. There's even that very subtle scene where there's that his mistress is in the bathroom or whatever, like distraught, and he is sitting, alone in the bed, and You don't know what has gone wrong, but something has gone wrong. And then these are the kind of notions that I feel like, yeah, by watching these films, they really challenge your notion that your empathy or your humanity is not necessarily tied to knowing exactly what happened, but knowing something did go wrong. And maybe they had an argument, maybe we don't know who's wrong, who's right, and all that, but there are two human beings hurting right now. And can't you just recognize that? So I thought that scene was really powerful too, that can't you just see the two hurt people? She's clearly hurt too. She's having an affair, but she's hurt in one way or another now. Has she just broken up with him? Is that it? Is everything leaving him now? She wants to stop the affair. His cousin will leaves, like, is that him going back into his ex-wife is leaving. So in some ways it's his life is leaving him, and it's just him in his loneliness and his alienation.
And he's kind of also stalking in the way. I think it's in the airport when he's looking.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like that shows how similar they are, the main characters again. That both of them are kind of stalking in different ways, and then they are both left alone in the end.
Yeah, and the stalking is always such an interesting metaphor because it's like it's kind of there, right? We talked about it in Three Iron and all that stuff. This watching from a distance other people's lives and then wondering, oh, I'm missing out on something, or why don't I have that, or if I had that, then it would be better. But then there's also a futility that sometimes you get what you want and it doesn't end up being any better, because that's like traveling, like we were talking about before. You go different places, but wherever you go, it's you. So you're going to bring your problems, you're going to bring your issues, and meaningful change is so difficult. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, very, very emotionally challenging film, I have to say.
And it
I
made a
almost
good.
felt watching something troglodyte-esque, so just to rinse my palate, and then I was like, no, no, I can't do that, because that would be a mistake. You need to let it linger and sit there and continue to make you uncomfortable, because that's the only way. If you try to just say, okay, that's challenging, and I need to cleanse all that out of my system, then that defeats the purpose. It's meant to make you feel that for a while.
Yeah, but like the film says, the Vulgarians and the intellectuals in the end are the same. So I don't
Yeah.
think it matters whether you watch a Vulgarian film after or not, because we are all the same anyway.
Yeah, but it would it be kind of your as trying to escape your uncomfortable feelings, because something's made you uncomfortable, and then you got to think about why it's made you uncomfortable, but instead you try to just, oh, let me just cleanse myself of that. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's him, like when he's watching Stalker and he's just like so disappointed that he can't make films like Tarkovsky, that he just basically just starts watching porn, and he's like, yeah, I just need to cleanse this despair out of my system. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but yeah, we are this conflicted thing. Um,
And that's
but yeah,
also maybe kind of autobiographical in the way that, again, he's trying to be like Tarkovsky, again, Ceylan, and he is
yet he
realizing
just
that.
feels like a troglodyte. He feels
Yeah,
like an imposter.
yeah,
Like
and
when Karasmaki said, "I can never do it like you, Ozu."
yeah.
So maybe he feels like I'll never be Tarkovsky, or this world, even if I was, won't appreciate Tarkovsky. Doesn't appreciate Tarkovsky anymore. It's a world of beauty pageants and trash TV with hundreds of channels, which the character says in one of the dialogues, hundreds of channels, but only crap on TV all the time.
Well, like that you want to be Tarkovsky again, that living another person's life and seeing some greatness there, even though in the end probably it wasn't that great. It just feels great from that outsider perspective. So
But I appreciate that he he supports physical media. Even his pornography was on VHS and it wasn't internet porn.
Yeah.
That's just a joke, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, and in a place like Turkey, probably, yeah, because if you're being your internet activity is probably being tracked, so and all that. So I don't know. I don't know that for a fact, so I'm not. So, anyways, yeah. Or maybe it's that because he's hiding that so far away, like he wants to hide that part of himself so far away, so no one knows. He needs to keep up his facade with his classical music CDs and books and all that. Great film, but you loaded. I was like, SGS has really hammered us. Nostalgia and Uzak, like, wow. I was like, okay, he really wants to challenge us now.
In the end, I felt like this was actually harder to talk about than nostalgia, even though beforehand I didn't
Yeah.
expect that.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that and I felt nervous about it too because I feel like nostalgia has an intellectual quality, which is you can kind of get into that pocket and talk about okay, the Soviet Union and there's the history and this is much more discombobulated. It's like it's not really it's much more ethereal. It's much more emotional. It's much more. It's hard to tie down to specific things. You're not really talking about specific things, but you're talking about exploration. So I think it's a very difficult. I was like, oh, I don't know how to talk about this film either, really, because it's so simple in plots. So you can't just talk about plots. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And again, I think it's easy to kind of go around the same circles with a film like this because you just think about alienation, 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 and then.
yeah.
But with nostalgia, there were so many kind of different strands of analysis that you could go through. This is maybe a bit more focused in a way that it has a bit of clearer theme and maybe more one-sided theme when nostalgia was about like so many different things at once.
Mm. Um, but one shout out for this film is that magnificent scene where he comes across upon that cargo ship that's run aground and it's covered in snow. And I don't know, it just felt like this moment of like something dying in your soul almost. Like when he walks up upon it, it's there's just something so powerful about that image, and it made you feel so much despair just looking at that, just that seeing that, because cargo ships and all that stuff, all that technology, progress, industrialization, globalization, and here is a symbol of that run aground, and they're just covered with a blanket of snow, like that. I don't know. It made me feel despair, like disheartened, like resigned. It was heavy. It was both beautiful and heavy.
Yeah, that's a great scene. And then I was also thinking about one more thing, that this film is a good example of a piece of art where you can definitely see the things that have influenced it, but it manages to make those influences their own in a way that it manages to transcend the influences and
Yeah,
become something very particular and of its own thing. But you can similarly see that, yeah, there's Dostoevsky and Tarkovsky in the background too. So
yeah. And I guess this is scattered and going back to something you said, but it's interesting when you said, yeah, the cousins, they're just like each other. They're kind of paralleling each other. Because there's that scene where he's in the restaurant, like eating by himself, and then the woman who's he's having an affair with is coming in with her husband or possibly another man, I don't know. And then they're sitting down having dinner, and then he's kind of leaving the scene. It kind of mirrors a bit when the cousin follows that girl, and he's about to approach her, and then the other man she's in a relationship with shows up, and then he's just like rejected. So though there are a lot of this mirroring, and I haven't seen Mirror or Stalker, but I'm very interested that when we do get to Stalker and Mirror, how those themes were woven into this film. You would have a much clearer understanding of that, given you've seen those films. But yeah, there is this mirroring. It's the same but different things happening between the cousins.
Yeah, I think in Ceylan films in general, everything is just kind of a bit more in your face and clearer than in Tarkovsky films. So, yeah, so these are in many ways way more accessible than the Tarkovsky films, and they have like a very different vibe in some ways that they make you feel very different than Tarkovsky films and more uncomfortable than Tarkovsky films. And in Tarkovsky films you focus on the beauty, but in Ceylan films you focus on maybe a bit more that how they relate to your own life. They're maybe a bit more grounded in reality than Tarkovsky films. Because Tarkovsky films feel like they exist in their completely their own time and space, like in a different kind of magical universe almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Tarkovsky has inspired some really great filmmakers who followed his tradition. When you look at it, even that film I saw, the Lighthouse, that Georgian film, whose filmmaker, passed away too young as well. But the way she also shot and stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, Tarkovsky is really inspired like great cinema going forward, and everyone's found their own expression, but within that tradition, and it's like just like Ozu and stuff like so. It's really nice to see how it's being honored and taken forward in different ways in their own expressions. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll of course watch some Belatar films for the podcast as well, and that's another director who was inspired by Tarkovsky. So.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Yes.
Yeah, but again, another interesting discussion, another great film, and I'm looking forward to talking about other films by the director in the future. Maybe next one would be Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, which might be the best one I have seen so far, and I still need to watch some that I haven't seen yet either. And people, if you can catch his latest film in the cinemas, maybe consider doing that. I'm sure that the latest film is really good because he seems to be a very consistent director. I've only seen good and great films from him. So
yeah, and his most recent film is on the Criterion Channel now. So if you can't make it to the cinema, it's there now, about dry grasses. So
and there will probably be a physical release as well. So.
Yeah, I wonder if any of his films will come to Criterion Collection now. We'll see. About Dry Grasses will probably come to Jana's contemporaries, but we'll see. Yeah.
So yeah, let us know what you think of the movie if you have seen it. I know Tony has at least seen it a few years ago. I wonder how well he still remembers it, but again, he tends to leave great comments, so but we'll see.
Yeah, looking forward to those.
Yeah. So anyway, in a couple of weeks' time, we will talk about Yasujiro Ozu's An Autumn Afternoon and Nicolas Ray's Bigger Than Life, two films that don't really relate to each other than that they have like family dynamics in both of them, I guess, but in a very different way. But that will be an interesting duo to talk about, and two films that I'm very much looking forward to watching again.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to seeing them for the first time.
And as always, you can see the full schedule down below. So look at that. But anyway, thanks for watching. Don't drink Coke at all. Sayonara and arigato gozaimashita.